Hey, this is Tony Boss Bolin coming to you from the Lincoln Addict Podcast.
Hey, it's ODB, the Lincoln Addict, back with another episode. Whether you're consuming this on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, thank you so much for all of the support. I'm going to jump right into this episode, but if you're on YouTube, thank you. Please watch till the end. I'll give you a little bit of a hint of what the next episode's coming in terms of the content. Also, you get a richer experience on YouTube simply for the fact that this episode's going to be heavy on showcasing some different footage and just some of the things that I'm talking about. I'll share my screen. If you are consuming on YouTube, you'll see, shout out to my wife. She's got me the Diamond Dogs shirt. Ted Lasso fans, anyone out there? I was probably the last to watch the show and I absolutely loved it. My wife kept telling me for a long time, you got to check it out. And it's a fun show. So just a little pop culture stuff there for you. What I'm going to go ahead and do is give a huge shout out to Devious Customs as I kind of get into what the topic of this episode is. More than likely, you've seen the thumbnail, so you have a little bit of a hint. But as I always say, if you need custom parts for your Lincoln, or let's say you're willing to customize it a little bit, maybe with an upgraded window switch that looks along the lines of the factory look and feel, hit up Devious Customs, just how it sounds.com. Talk to Jeff and team if you have any questions. He's got everything from windshields to speaker equipment to air suspension, you name it. For the most part, Jeff is either making it or he can get his hands on it. Huge shout out to Jeff for being a continued supporter of the podcast. On this episode, I've been wanting to do this for a while, and I'll talk a little bit later about what really kind of inspired me to just get my keyboard out and make this episode happen. And it's going to be the top 5 misconceptions of the 1961 through 1967 Lincolns. I usually call it the 1960s Lincolns. Sometimes folks will go, well, that I guess could include 1960, but that's not what I'm referring to for the most part. So when I say 1960s Lincolns, we're talking about pretty much 61 through 69. Of course, the convertibles ran from 61 until 67. So that's what we'll be talking about on this episode. Again, huge shout out to Devious Customs. Okay, next we got the Lincoln Community Update. So the greater Lincoln community out there, Lincoln lifestyle, whatever you want to call it, Lincoln life. And first and foremost, I want to thank everyone that came out to the Tampa Kennedy Cruise, the 2025 event. Really a huge success. My favorite thing about it was because our friend Lou Piano, I believe is how you say his last name, because he made it out again in the 1940 Lincoln Continental, which I believe, going off the top of my head, was the first year of the Lincoln Continental as we know it. Vic, issue free. I know the year prior he had a little bit of a challenge with one of the tires, but he got that patched up, and that car as well as all of the cars ran beautifully. And it was so cool to see so many great people come out. We had 80 plus years of Lincolns represented. The easy math is, hey, we had 2018 Continental. We had some newer Lincolns even from that with Andrew and some of the other folks that came out. We had some of the 90s and 2000s as well. But easily, 1940 to 2020, 80 years. And that was super cool. So we had roughly almost 30 cars. I think in the final photo, we had a couple non-Lincolns sneak in, which was kind of cool. A little Easter egg there for some. But for the most part, easily 26 Lincolns, and it was super cool. The video showcases those Lincolns. So if you're not following us on social media, I'm pretty much on Facebook, Instagram. You could go out there, follow Lincoln Addict, and you'll see the content. So again, thanks to everybody that came out. And we got a chance to meet a lot of folks. One of the older gentlemen, kind of old school guy, had a 64 Lincoln Continental Blue. Really reminded me of my 64 Smuggler's Blues. He took a lot of photos with his 35 millimeter kind of newer school digital camera. And he's going to be getting those over to me. So I'm super excited about that. Okay, Lincoln sales trends. I'm not going to talk a lot about maybe the sales trends right now, but I still wanted to talk a little bit about this one's almost going to merge this week with Lincoln's for sale, simply because we've got some big auctions coming up, being that January is coming. Okay, first and foremost, Barrett-Jackson, one of their the flagship auctions in the world, and especially their flagship event, which is their Scottsdale mid-January. Mid to late January. So you'll see here, if you're on YouTube, you can see my screen, January 17th to the 25th of 2026. This is out in Scottsdale, of course. I won't bore you with all of the details, but I think as of, I counted, I think it was about 13 or 14, 60s Lincolns. If you're looking here, there's a 1975 Lincoln Continental Mark custom coupe that's a Batmobile, not including that. The trend that I'm continuing to see is that folks are building these convertible Lincolns. They're doing these engine swaps with the Coyotes and whatnot. As an example, here's a 67 Continental full custom resto mod slab rehab LLC build for Barrett Jackson, I believe is, exclusively for Barrett Jackson. And not sure if they built it for them for Barrett to sell. I think it's an exclusive build to bring to that particular auction. There's really a plethora of different Lincolns for sale, but if you scroll through these on Barrett Jackson's website, I'm expecting that some more will come into the fold, but you can see the majority of them are convertibles. There are a sedan or two that are kind of sprinkled in here. But as you can imagine, with the high sales that we've seen with the sales numbers, it's only natural that there's going to be builders and whatnot, different shops, and maybe someone that says, hey, I've got a Lincoln, I'm going to go ahead and add a few things to it and then take it to auction to liquidate it. You're going to have a good amount of that. What I'm excited to see is Ali is bringing a couple of cars, my understanding. He, of course, has 2 back-to-back years selling for a very, very high number. I think it was 660,000, if I remember correctly. And it'll be interesting to see if we continue to see that trend. I've seen some prices that are a little under what we saw just a few years ago for, the sedans and the convertibles, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to see some very, very solid and high numbers at Barrett Jackson or Mecum. It just is a little bit of indication of where maybe the market is going. However, I could sit here and say, hey, we're not going to see big numbers, and then big numbers come. You just never really know who's going to be there. In my opinion, a lot of these folks that are buying these cars, sometimes they've got, companies, and these cars are going to maybe go into those company names, and, they've got, I'm not a tax expert, but they probably have, someone advising them on, hey, you need to go ahead and spend some money based upon where you are with your revenue at these companies and whatnot. So it's always fun to see where the market is going to go, and only time will tell. And speaking of that, let's take a look at Mecum. Okay, we're going to bounce over here to Mecum, and same thing here. You can go to Mecum's website. I typed in Lincoln Continental once I signed in. And you may not even have to sign in, but you do have to sign in to see the sales numbers. Of course, this is an auction coming up, give or take a little less than a month. And what you're going to see are some nice cars. I'm not doing full reviews here, but we can see here they also estimate, like this car, 225 to 250,000. Again, it will be interesting to see. We can look and we can tell it has an LS engine in it. It's a black convertible. It's, custom wheels, custom screen, custom gauges, things like that for the most part, kind of a resto mod, right? Then you're going to see other things like more of a stock car. You're going to see here a 61, beautiful color, lowered, big wheels, that type of thing. And then, oh, by the way, here's a 62 that looks fairly stock. And they're not going to estimate the price on this one. It's not some crazy resto mod, but by all means, these cars are out there. And although I'm not at all affiliated with either of those auction houses that I mentioned, nor Bring a Trailer, certainly anyone is welcome to kind of go out there, scope out what you're looking for. And because we've got a little bit of a lead up to those 2 auctions, I do expect for more to possibly kind of come in here very soon. Now let's look at Bring a Trailer. Okay, same thing with Bring a Trailer. I can just do a quick search and I can land here. I just typed in Lincoln Continental, so it's going to pull up non-60s as well. But here's an example for you real quick. On December 20th, I didn't get a chance to do a listing review on this one. This 63, and really a classy color, sold for $54,000. And you kind of scroll down and you go, wow, kind of looks like a Survivor style car, AC, pretty clean underneath. 54,000 is obviously, it's money. I get it. But to me, it's kind of coming in at a fair price that people can kind of say, hey, I could see spending that. Now, certainly some of the old school guys are going to say, hey, I remember when I could buy these for 12,000. Absolutely. But to me, we're seeing some manageable prices at least come in here where I think someone that's really in the market for one could snag one. You could say, well, hey, Jay, here's a 65 that sold for 9 days prior at 71,000. Absolutely. Black 65, very sought after, lots of comments, 70 comments. And you kind of scroll through here, you see a black 65 Lincoln Continental Convertible. If someone bought this car, let's say for 50,000, and they did any amount of work in it, you could easily get the 70 grand like that. So to get a turnkey, top works, windows work, things like that, that's a pretty dang good deal in the grand scheme of things. Again, 71, kind of, I think, a solid price. And that kind of is a good indication of it's not like the market has folded in any way. But here you go. Here's a 62 sedan. To me, classy color. Again, not going to go into a full review, but what we could see is it sold for 24,000. A fair price. If you're looking for a sedan, you could get something out here. Again, you would want to kind of go through, maybe watch some of my listing reviews in the past, or at least, really scope it out. Here was a big surprise for me. This was a car that I think I did the listing review on this one. It was a 65 convertible. This is back right around Thanksgiving of this year. Sold for $44,777. Man, to me, a 65, in this condition, non-AC car, original MEL 430. If I recall correctly, this was a pretty solid car, and you're at 45K. Very doable. We've seen, again, the market kind of go up and down. I'm not going to necessarily go into maybe the reasons for that. Everybody kind of has their opinion on whatnot. A lot of people are kind of pulling the purse strings a little bit, but certainly the car market is kind of in a world of its own in terms of where the prices go and where they've been. 63 Lincoln Continental Convertible. This is the last one I'll touch upon. 63, very sought after year. And we could see, obviously, has the bigger wheels with the 15-inch hubcaps, aka wheel covers. But you look at this and go 58. Pretty strong price. But it just goes to show you that these cars are out there, and depending on how much coin you've saved or you have to potentially spend, you can nab one potentially online or at an auction that you attend in person. So the Lincoln Community Updates is brought to you by our friends and family at Colorado Custom Wheels. You can visit coloradocustom.com with no S. Hit up Michael and team. Also, the kinfolk over at Chino and Sons, they recently did a pre-sale type deal where you can get in on the purchase of the Lincoln replica wheels, which is really very close to the same set that I have. However, they went a step further. They have either powder coat or paint the black on that wheel, so it really looks like an original hubcap, which is super cool. There's different sizes available. So Chino and Sons on Instagram. I believe they're on Facebook as well, but you can contact Colorado Custom and they would get you in contact with them, the great people over there. And I think it's super cool. I've always loved the wheels that I have on my car, and you don't have to worry about the original hubcaps flying off. If you don't have a bias ply tire, those hubcaps can and will go flying on your particular car. And it kind of has to do with how the original hubcaps, they were set up for bias ply tires. So the radials kind of put a little pressure on those grippers, if you will, on the back, and those things can go flying. So it's a safety hazard potentially. coloradocustom.com for more information. Okay, Lincoln's for sale. I kind of really covered that. The tip that I would give you is you got to be ready to rock and roll. Like if you're rolling into 2026 and you're going, hey, I want to get one of these cars, my wife and I, or my partner and I, we're on the same page. We want to get out there. We want to cruise with the Raddies. We want to cruise with these different crews throughout the country. We want to join the LCOC maybe, right? The Lincoln and Continental Owners Club. Yeah, you got to be ready to rock and roll. You got to kind of know what your budget is. And certainly I just showed you some cars that are coming up for sale, some that recently sold. Gives you an idea of what the budget is. Now, certainly there's always going to be someone that maybe finds one in town. Hey, a friend of a family that's got one, and they're just looking to get it into a good home. There are deals to be had. It does seem like as time goes on, those deals do become harder and harder to find. And that's the same way in anything, whether you're into Mopars, I'm into old school BMX bikes, vinyl, AKA records. There's been a huge surge in popularity the past 10 or 15 years with albums and people selling those and collecting them and things like that. So whatever you're into, we've seen that it's getting harder and harder to find old vintage stuff, including these Lincolns. So don't get depressed, stay focused and obviously check out some of those sites that I mentioned. When people ask me, hey, where should I sell my Lincoln? I tell people all the time, if you're not with some crazy build or you're not wanting to go to Arizona or Kissimmee for these different bigger auctions, Bring a Trailer is a fantastic marketplace. And I often talk about it. A lot of people are on there and they just kind of make it easy. So big ups to Bring a Trailer. Lincoln's for Sale is brought to you by Griot's Garage. Thanks to Nick and the great people over at Griot's. Such great products. I know it's kind of late in the game for this year holidays, but if you're still looking for some gifts, go to your local parts store. Oftentimes, if you look in the detailing products, you're going to see Griot's. They're good people, Griots Garage, and their products are superior. I had Nick on a past episode, and he talks about why. Okay, next we got Lincoln's in TV, movies, music videos, album covers, you name it, a bunch of different media there. And this one's kind of cool. I don't know that I've talked about it, but because we're on the eve almost of Christmas 2025, I wanted to mention this one again. This was a cool find I came across. And I wasn't ever a huge fan of this show. I think my wife maybe had it on from time to time, but there's a show that many of you have heard of called Melrose Place. And if you think about Santa's coming to town, he came to town on one of their episodes in a 1960s Lincoln Continental convertible. How many Santas can fit in a 64 Lincoln Continental convertible? I guess it depends how big the Santa is. Oh, Melrose Place, Season 7, Episode 19, The Usual Santas. These Santas commit a, on TV robbery, not in real life, and they make their getaway vehicle is a 64 Lincoln Continental convertible. I've shared it in social media, I believe, a couple of times. I'll reshare it probably on Christmas or maybe Christmas Eve, just to kind of tie in. I love doing the tie-ins to Christmas or the season, if you will, the holiday season. But it's pretty cool. You can go out there and probably find it on YouTube, Melrose Place, Season 7, Episode 19. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, why would you leave in a getaway car? I know it's TV, that everybody would be like, oh yeah, 5 Santas. I mean, again, I know it's TV. Jumped in a black old school Lincoln convertible sports car, not. So there's even a little quick change in the scene. Maybe you can pick it up. Lincoln's in TV, movies, music videos, album covers brought to you by our kinfolk, our family rather, at Steel Rubber, STEELE rubber.com. Hit up the fine folks over at Steel Rubber. You want to make sure that your Lincoln is sealed with steel, and that's steel, STEELE. The reason for that is they have the best weather stripping products in the world. These cars are probably one of the more expensive cars. We've established that. But when you think about the expense rather, that goes into a 60s Lincoln as it relates to weather stripping, well, there's a good bit of it, from the convertible to the trunk to all of the little places on the car that you probably never even thought about. SteelRubber.com, you can search your make, model, and year, and you can make a list, or you can check out that list that it displays. I always kind of copy and paste, put it into a spreadsheet, kind of say, hey, what do I need? What's my budget? What can I order? SteelRubber.com for the great kinfolk there. Okay, about the 21-minute mark, tried to make the intro to the episode, the podcast episode, a little bit more streamlined. Not sure that I did, but I'm going to go ahead and jump into the main topic. Okay, so this again is the top 5 misconceptions of 1961 through 1967 Lincoln Continental convertibles. These are my opinions based upon years of being around these cars, talking to the great folks in the community, and I hope that you appreciate these. Please feel free to comment. Let me know, like, hey, yeah, do I agree with that? Or no, man, you should have put this in there. All of that engagement helps, and I love reading the comments. I try to respond to most, if not all. I will say this, please, if you could do me a favor, I want to give one more shout out to the YouTube channel, 2 Guys and a Ride. They've got about 60,000 followers, subscribers rather, And they recently did 3 features on 1960s Lincolns in the Tampa Bay area. Chris, Tony, and then myself. 3 different cars, 3 different styles. And I asked that you go out and watch those videos. Some of their videos have a lot of views on them. The 60s Lincolns, I thought that they were going to have more. So go out there and support, watch to the end if you can. Okay, so number 5. Okay, this is the number 5 ODBs. That's mine. Top 5 misconceptions about 1960s Lincolns. Okay, convertibles specifically. The top is super complicated. Although this is often the comment on TV shows, social media comments, etc., the truth is the engineering was done by the Ford Motor Company engineers. Okay, the complicated work has already been done. All right. Now, I know they can be a little overwhelming. I totally get it. And I've learned a lot over the years just by owning one, okay? But I will say this, maintaining the top via maintenance and or fixing a challenge that you run into can be much easier than you realize, okay? Gotta stick with me on this. I'll give you an example. I'm not going to share my screen on this, but just a little bit ago when I was looking at the 65 Lincoln Continental Convertible on Bring a Trailer that sold for $71K, you could go out there and find it. One of the most recent comments literally said one that's going to tie into my next one. But again, it's in social media. You have people, there's a misconception that they just go, oh, such and such, that's a super complicated car. Now, I will tell you, my friend Ruben Artiaga and some of my friends that have either asked me questions or asked Tony, yeah, there's definitely, I think, a consensus that these cars were quote unquote overbuilt. If you think about the quality that Lincoln was putting into these, bench testing the engines, doing the stress tests on the cars, even before they left the factory, reinforces that they were kind of overbuilt, right? But you can't just take someone's word for it and go, wow, the top is so complicated, you'll never figure it out. It depends really on, are you willing to get your hands dirty? Are you willing to get out there and read a little bit, look at the wiring diagram? So let's talk about a little bit of it. Now, as John Cashman has preached for years, you want to get yourself a test light and a wiring diagram, okay? One really great thing is that John Cashman on his eBay store has this for sale. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. Okay, so if you go on eBay, and you type in John Cashman, that's his seller name. He has over 1,000 sales. And this is a kit. Now, he has it right now. I think there's only 3 items. We can look at his other C-sellers, other items. And he's got the 61 to 63, 64, 65, 66, 67. Not only does it come with the test light, the main thing that you're buying is the repair and adjustment guide. Now, this is from the guy, arguably, that knows these tops better than potentially anyone in the world. He's definitely going to be in the top 3, if not the top guy, right? He was on Jay Leno's Garage. He's committed over 40 years of his life, many of those traveling the country to work on these cars. Now, I know what you're saying, okay? Hey, it can be intimidating. Absolutely. It can be intimidating, but if you want to own one of these cars, I highly suggest that you have one of these items. Even when you're at the comfort of your own place, you can get out there and tinker a little bit and kind of understand, watch different videos on YouTube, check out Lincoln Addict Podcast, different things that you can do in the event that you're out in your Lincoln. Let's say a rainstorm is getting ready to come. This almost happened to me earlier this year at a wedding event in June. Wasn't supposed to rain that day, and literally the skies opened up. And there could be some close calls here and there, but you got to feel confident that you can kind of get back there and do a few things if you need to. And these books that John sells for your particular Lincoln, again, we're talking 61 through 67, with a light can be a lifesaver. The key thing is you really got to get to know your car in general. If you have a really nice car that's been well maintained and kept inside, I mean, I've known people that have owned Lincolns and rarely, if ever, have an issue with the top. Knock on wood, I've done a bunch of stuff on my 64 along with Blair and Teresa. When I first got it, I did a ton of stuff on my own, following things from the Lincoln Forum, following comments in the past that John Cashman has made, and got it to the point where I was like, okay, great. I did pay some experts to help me in a few areas that I wasn't 100% confident in, but I've learned a lot since then. And then, oh, by the way, my 65, getting that car from Robert, that car has been just an absolute pleasure. There have been a couple of hiccups here and there, but you're always going to have that. I mean, these cars are 60 plus years old. Now, as an example, there was a day earlier this year that the very next day I had a wedding event that I was doing, kind of a chauffeur service that I like to do. I do a handful of these throughout the year. The day prior, I usually will prep the car and I'll kind of go through this little list of checking the fluids and things like that. I wanted to open the trunk and the deck lid would not unlock, the trunk wouldn't open. Didn't stress out. Based upon what I had learned in the past, was able to take out the rear seat. That only took a couple of minutes, jump the one relay. John Cashman has a video. Actually, it's not his specific video. It was a client of his. He has a video on YouTube for those that didn't know. And you can jump the relay to unlock the deck lid. So you get the little locks to spin. Boom, it's unlocked. You jump the other relay. Boom, the deck lid is coming open. Now you can kind of get in there. Sometimes it's just a switch that's a little bit faulty. You know, you kind of put a little bit of stuff on it to kind of clean it up. You kind of move it a little bit. A lot of folks will tell you over the course of time, like, don't leave the tops down for years on end or months on end. You know, cycle it here and there. Those switches will get a little bit sticky and things like that. And oh, by the way, like I said, 60 plus years old on these cars. So, you know, again, I didn't get stressed out. I just said, hey, what do I need to do to get the deck lid open? And after I did that and I kind of pushed on the switch a little bit, knock on wood, I haven't had any other hiccups since then. Put the seat back in, been good to go. So that's something to keep in mind. You must remember, like I always say, that these cars, depending on what year you have, they're 60 plus years old. You will need to replace a relay, clean a switch, grease a lock, dump a relay. You know, some of those things you may need to do at some point, especially on these cars. Could we argue that the overall system is kind of complicated? Yeah. You could argue and say, wow, the engineers 60 plus years ago, look what they came up with. Now, I'm going to talk more about that history. It actually goes back to the early 50s on the concept and where it led to the cars pre these 1961 through 67 Lincolns. But the key thing is that if you get one of these cars and you feel confident enough to go, wow, if I just had to put my top up, if I just had to test a relay, there's a bunch of resources out there as well. I'm going to go into more of those on another video, but you know, there are services like I had Brewer Classic Lincoln on. He offers an over-the-phone service. Now, it's not free, but certainly if he thinks he knows what the issue is and you pay him for his time, you could send a relay to him and I think he still checks it for free. And if it's just a relay, boom, he'll send you out another relay or he'll rebuild it. Things can be that simple, but the way I look at it is the complicated work was done by the engineers. You know, these tops have cycled hundreds, if not thousands of times, right, over the course of time. And will things break? Absolutely. But can these be super reliable? 100%. I've had a lot of folks chime in on my post over the course of time, and they've said, man, I used to have a such and such, never had an issue, drove it across the country, so on and so forth. Someone buys a 60s Lincolns down, they go, oh, I broke down. You know, it's kind of a joke that we have. Well, yeah, I mean, the cars are 60 plus years old and they're not, dare I say, kind of a watered down car. I mean, these cars were like the top of the line at that point, right? So they, you know, instead of having roll windows, you know, you have electric windows, right? So the more features you have in a car, by the way, if you have AC, there's more things that could kind of potentially go wrong. So number 5, again, is the top is super complicated. Again, I would argue that the engineers did the hard work to maintain it and to diagnose a few things. If you have that kit that John Cashman sells with the test light, which you may already have, and oh, by the way, you get the book, or there's other literature out there I'll talk more about in another video. There's plenty of resources out there to kind of get you going. The main thing is you don't want to get stuck in a rainstorm or somewhere like that. Knock on wood, it hasn't happened to me. Okay, number 4. Okay, and I literally saw this comment on that 65 Lincoln that I showed earlier. If you go back on Bring a Trailer, you'll see it. You will see comments such as, these convertibles are a wiring, or replace wiring with the word electrical, an electrical nightmare. Although a casual person will often comment via social media, I just gave you an example from a week or two ago, this couldn't be further from the truth. Is there a lot of wiring on these 61 to 67 Lincolns? Absolutely, especially the convertibles, which is what we're talking about. However, a car that has been well kept, such as indoors for most of its existence, not exposed to harsh elements or critters such as mice or other critters. The truth is often that the wiring is the least of your worries, especially if it hasn't been monkeyed with or cut into by a previous owner or mechanic. All right. I get if you're not a car person and you get one of these cars and you're having an issue. I've been there before in my life and you're frustrated. Okay. You're super frustrated. You're like, man, my windows won't go down. And like the top's down and I want to cruise. I'm like, I just can't figure it out. Believe me, these cars, 60 plus years, at some point, some of these cars were in mechanic shops. They didn't know what they were doing. They were frustrated. Someone cuts some stuff, starts doing some stuff. Believe me, you don't have to do all that. If you think about these cars brand new, everything worked flawlessly. There's plenty of experts, like I said, out there that you can rely upon. A John Cashman, a Brewer, a Tony Bolin, a Blair Farmer, Lincoln Land. I'm going to talk more about this in my upcoming video that I'll give you a hint at the end of this, what I'm talking about. But the bottom line is often relays just simply need to be rebuilt or replaced. There are relays in many places that can impact everything from the top functions to the main window switch on the driver door not working. Again, Lincoln Land or Blair Farmer in Clearwater, Tony Boss Bolin, Brewer Classic Lincolns, John Cashman, the convertible top man, all of these folks can help. They kind of all do a little bit different. Not every one of these folks is going to be able to get on the phone with you and talk you through your problem without maybe charging for their time. But rest assured, including the Lincoln Forum, social media, Facebook groups, these different folks I mentioned, you can get the car going. Okay, you can get the top working. So bottom line, when you open that trunk, let's say on a 61 through, I'll just say on my 64 Lincoln, when I open the trunk on that passenger side back in that rear quarter panel, I'm going to lift up that curtain, right? Or take out that piece of cardboard, if you will, feeling material. You're going to have all of your relays there. The different resources that are out there, it's going to tell you what each of those relays do, okay? When you pull that wiring plug, not going to go all into it on this episode, but you can jump that right there if you need to do a certain thing, okay? My suggestion is obviously, yeah, if you have a professional and you don't feel comfortable doing it, you have someone near you that can do it, absolutely do it. But to learn how to maybe do some of these things that would help you potentially if you're in a tight situation, absolutely. So number 4 was these convertibles are a wiring nightmare. Not really. They're really not. Okay. Do they have a bunch of relays? Absolutely. Is it maybe a little bit overbuilt compared to your average car? Absolutely. But they're not wiring nightmares. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. Number 3, the rear window auto drops are wired to tie into the top functionality. This is 100% not true. The electric windows, including the auto drop functionality, are 100% separate from the top functionality. It is true that when a passenger pushes the button for the rear door handle and begins to open the door, the auto drop should drop a few inches. I think it's 3 to 4. I haven't measured it, but I know it's in that range, 2 to 4 maybe. The reason for this is very similar to what you see on newer convertibles. My mother-in-law has a newer convertible, a 2-door, beautiful soft top car. I think it's soft top. Is it hard top? Soft top or hard top? I can't remember. And when she opens the door, the window drops about an inch and raises when the door is closed. And the reason for this, on the rear windows, the way the weather stripping is we want for that door to open with the window down. When the door closes, the window goes up and it seals against that convertible seal, and steel sells those. But that seal, that weather stripping, you want a good tight seal there. But 100%, the top is not connected to that. If you put the top down, like I usually will do, or I'll put the windows down first. If you put the top down and you're like, oh, well, I don't want to drive around with my windows up. Now I'm going to put my windows down. The windows may not go down. Front, back, 1 of them, 3 of them, 4 of them. It's because, again, it's completely separate. So they are not tied at all. Now, is the windows a whole nother topic? Absolutely, right? But from the convertible perspective, the main difference is, number 1, you've got the auto drops. The sedans don't have that. And number 2, you do not have the B pillar. So you have the A pillar at your windshield, the B pillar is typically in the middle, and then you've got the C pillar. Well, a convertible doesn't have a B pillar or a C pillar. The sedans have both, the convertibles do not. Now, if you come across a car that's been sitting a very long time and you throw a battery in it, I could see why someone might think the windows are tied to the top functionality, because often neither are going to work. But the truth is they are separate systems. The good thing is it allows you to focus on one of the headaches and then the other. When I first got my 64 Lincoln Continental Convertible, the top didn't work, windows didn't work. Well, the number one thing on the top was that when someone had changed the solenoid, they didn't put the main wiring little eyelet back on the closest side to the passenger on the solenoid. So there was no connection there. Well, that was one thing. Got the top working, then it was like, okay, the windows. The windows was a separate thing. So again, it gives you an opportunity to focus on both separately. Okay, number 2. This is a fun one. There's no room in the trunk when the top is down. Now, I can kind of see why people believe this. However, it's not true. When the top is retracted into the trunk, it is true that a good majority of the trunk space is taken up, well, by the convertible top. However, there's more room than you might expect. Let's take, for instance, the 64 and 65. Now, keep in mind, 61, 2, and 3 is a different setup in the trunk. Because of the way the gas tank is mounted in there, you do have a little bit different setup in those years, but I'm speaking to 64, 65 specific right now. You had the space in the middle of the trunk closest to the deck lid where you could put things such as golf clubs, luggage, etc. You also have the package tray area, which is under where the flapper sits. The flapper is what hides the section where the convertible top would protrude if the top was up and it was latched, right? So that convertible top comes out of that section and it's latched to the windshield. Well, when the top is down, it goes back into the trunk and then the flapper comes out. And then when it closes, you have that clean look there, right? You have that package tray, we call it, underneath that flapper. You could put a small bag there. I often put my essentials, such as screwdrivers, like a little, as Tony would call it, a doctor's bag. A few little tools, maybe some Type F fluid that's with a good sealed cap on it, in there. That's a key thing. But, for someone to say, hey, there's no room in the trunk, that's not 100% true. Now, like the 57 Skyliner, for instance, there's way less. There is a little, almost looks like a milk crate that's in there, and that's your only little section to kind of put things. It is way less. So you have that, but at the end of the day, there is some room in there. If you were going on a road trip, or let's say, back in the day, some mover and shaker was going to the airport and he needed to throw his luggage in there, well, he's probably going to put it in the back seat. Let's be honest, like didn't even touch upon that. But let's say the family was going out of town for like a weekend. Yeah, you could fit a couple of duffel bags and things like that in there. Although, I don't think it's going to happen much these days. You're either going to have someone throw it on a trailer or they're going to drive somewhere and then come home for the same day. It just really depends. Or if you're solo in the car, just put it in the back seat, right? And number 1, this is what really inspired me to sit down and make this episode finally happen. People will ask, how can I simplify the convertible tops on these 1961 through 1967 Lincolns? Okay. And I kind of said this earlier, but although there is truly no need to simplify the top mechanism or the sequence of it, there are some things that you can do to kind of upgrade the system overall. Now, I'm going to talk more about that in the next episode of the podcast. I'm going to go into some very good specifics on different vendors you can reach out to. How could you take this system and go, hey, I want to upgrade? I hinted earlier, Brewer, for instance, Brewer Classic Lincolns. He can get a relay replaced for you. John Cashman can do that as well. They can mail some stuff out. John has that wiring diagram set up, right? All of that stuff is really key because there are going to be times when you go, you know what? I got to replace something. Okay. That's totally fine. Of course, Lincoln Land's going to be your go-to place as well. If you want to call them, they're going to be able to more than likely ship out a switch, something that's been rebuilt, something that's been tested. Okay. The bottom line is though, when people take these cars and they go, hey, I got a high-end client. We're going to build this high-end car. I want to make the top easier. With the exception of Nathan Wilson, okay? And Nathan, if you happen to hear this, I'm saying some prayers for your wife. I know you guys have been going through a lot, and I hope all is well, man. I know I haven't got a chance to see you in a minute, but I hope you guys are doing okay. Nathan Wilson is kind of a beast, right? Nathan and Phil on Phil's 64, like they upgraded the system from hydraulic fluid, the Type F, to electric. And that's kind of like a 101, right? I think Phil and Nathan both said that they probably would not do that again, even for a client. But with the exception of Nathan, that's really dug in and kind of understands these cars, and he's willing to do that on his own with Phil, there's no need to do it. We've seen a couple of people, and I saw someone recently that kind of started ripping out stuff, taking out the wiring, doing certain things, and they're like, hey, I want an expert to kind of come over here and, kind of simplify the system for, this client and whatnot, I said it earlier, the engineers have already figured out the hard part. Are there some switches that are going to have to maybe be cleaned, rebuilt, or swapped out? Absolutely. Same with relays, same with some solenoids, things like that. Those things are going to have to happen. I can guarantee it. But there's no reason to go ripping out the stuff. Sure, Nathan's done some cool things in the past. He's built his own relay banks. He had it set up to work with, I think it was the Samsung voice assistant or Alexa. It was one of the two. And it was like, put the top down. Like, he's done some extraordinary things, right? But he was doing those for clients and for builds that he was doing specifically. I will tell you, on these cars, that's really the last thing you got to worry about. I mean, sure, you want the top to work, but you should never go in there and rip out everything, okay? You shouldn't take all those cast pieces out. I don't care, who you are. There's a few times I know Lincoln Land with Eric and those guys, they've been doing this for a long, long time. If they've got something that they have to take apart, but I think most of us realize, like, you don't have to take all this stuff apart. Not every single thing has to be powder coated. It just don't overthink it. The next episode, again, I'm going to be able to go and give you some really good vendors, some specifics on, hey, I could go here. I want to upgrade and replace the switch. I want to do some small things that you could probably even do yourself. Absolutely. But there's no need to reinvent the wheel. These cars were built 60 plus years ago. And oh, by the way, like I said earlier, I'll talk more in the future about where the whole concept came for these tops. It ties into the Mark IIs. And it's a pretty cool story. But the engineers figured this stuff out long before us, and we don't need to worry about all that. So again, there's no need to simplify. But could you simplify a couple little areas? Maybe, but I wouldn't even call it simplify. I would call it kind of modernizing. And for the most part, I tell people, usually you don't have to do it. You don't need to rip out all your relays. If you had a car maybe sitting in a junkyard for 50 years and it was out in the weather and you're going to somehow restore the car, yeah, absolutely. Maybe now we're talking like we're going to rip out the entire wire harness of a car. But even then, I would say, let's look at it first. Okay, I have one bonus for you, and then I'm going to wrap this thing up. The bonus, the 1961 Lincoln Continental Convertible. So this is a misconception. People say the 1961 Lincoln Continental Convertible was the first retractable convertible top in the world. This is not true. Now, we know Lincoln had it, before 61, you go back to the 60, the 59, and 58, there's one or two custom Mark IIs. There were already convertibles in the world, right? We know that. Now, you start slicing and dicing four-door convertibles. That's a little bit harder, I think, because some of those old school cars, they were convertible. So I don't want to even slice it to that point, but I want to say this. A few people have pointed out that I believe it's called Pergo, is how you pronounce it. The Pergo in or around 1935 had a retractable roof. Now, I believe it was a two-door from the research that I've done, okay? So Ford Motor Company gets the lion's share of respect for the mass production, okay, of the 57 Skyliner, all right? I'm working on, again, another video that really that really relates to that. That'll probably come early, hopefully 2026. And it's really intriguing story, as I hinted earlier, but I believe it was the Pergo 402 for some reason is ringing a bell, or the Pergo 601 Eclipse. There's a few different things I wrote on my notes, but I'm going to show a photo right here. Pretty cool there. And it really just reinforces the ingenuity of the world, not just the US. Yeah, Ford did it awesomely with the production of the Skyliner, but again, that stuff was carried over from planning even before that. So it was super cool that Ford still said, hey, let's implement this. And that's what led to these convertible Lincolns that we love so much, 1961 through 1967. Okay, with that being said, I want to give a huge shout out to Devious Customs, Colorado Custom Wheels, Griot's Garage, and Steel Rubber. I appreciate you sticking with me to the end. Again, I'm working on the next video that's going to really tie into some of the things that you can do on these convertibles. Yeah, they can be a little head-scratching at times, but they're fun cars. There's plenty of resources out there. Don't get yourself down. I am ODB, the Lincoln Addict. Thanks so much for consuming this content. however you do. If you listen via a podcast app, go back and stream it through YouTube. I really appreciate it. ODB, we out of here. Peace.
Welcome to L.A. where the players play, and we ride on the things like every day.